So wanted to talk a little bit about deployed life. But let's flip the script because Casmo's our guest. Tell us what it's like to deploy for Uncle Sam in the United States of America's Army.
It's tremendous. It's really long. I think you guys cram like 3 deployments into one of ours. Ours are, it depends, right? Because it depends on what you're doing. If you're an infantry guy, you're probably hating life because you're stuck out at like the smallest places, or you could be, and you're eating MREs every day, and you're cut off and stuff. For aviation, it's really not that horrible. Typically you're at an air base or something like that, and it's fairly built up. You got pretty decent food. My Afghanistan tour 09 to 10 was probably the quote unquote worst, even though I had the most fun on that one. We started in Kandahar, which, is very built up, there's a lot going on there, but the food was not great. And then I got pushed out to a little base that had a dirt runway, which was cool to watch C-17s come in all the time and land on this little dirt runway. But it was basically just our helicopters. And when we started, we were crammed in, those little, we call them chews. I don't know if you guys had a different name, but like the little trailer type things, little containers, we had like 4 guys per chew while they were still getting everything expanded. We had no running water. We had no plumbing. So, you were taking a shower, you'd grab a couple water bottles and, go to the shower and just rinse yourself off. But once they got it sort of developed, then you'd probably have like 1 to 2 people per chew. I was a boss, so I got my own chew. And the problem, I think, with the Army stuff is it's just so long. Our deployments are, 12 months generally. I've had some short ones. But it's such an effort to move all of our stuff. And I think that's why it takes so long.
What is a short one? Define short.
I did a 5-month. I know that's like a long one still, but I did a 5-month.
Okay, just for close. Okay, Gawky.
Yeah.
Gawky?
Yeah. Well, Casmo, you're not selling me on it, man.
No, me either.
No, boat. I made a little video about boat life as an aviator, but it's basically camping with 5,000 of your closest friends, and there's some similarities in the fact that you pack all your toys and you go away for a while, so you can stay really focused on what you're doing because there's no distractions, which is cool. And if you get along with your squadron mates, it's actually, like Casmo said, it could be a really good time, even though it's a ton of work, which is the experience that I was lucky enough to have. But it's all perspective too, because our rooms or whatever that we stay, they're called state rooms. They try to make them sound really nice, but it's pretty tight. So there'll be 2 to, I believe, 6 or 8 man. I think the 8 man, we call it the jungle. That's where usually the PlayStation setup was. These were Navy problems. But it's all perspective. I remember being kind of irritated with crews as took off in the fog, crappy weather, flew 500 miles in the goo. The weather was crap. And I had my poopy pants pulled over my head. We check in with these Army guys on the ground, and, I forget my call sign, Diamond 4, whatever it was. I forget over there, but they're like, hey, hold on just 1 second. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's going to be go time. And he's like, sorry, man, wind's blowing pretty hard down here. I'd help the guys grab my tent. It was blowing away. And I was like, I was adjusting the air conditioning in the Hornet, and I was having my chicken dinners here. I was like, all right, it's not that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Perspective. That's right.
Perspective. Well, that's right. So,
I imagine you guys, all of you probably have the same challenges, though, in the sense that because particularly aviation, there's always somebody flying, which means there's always somebody sleeping. And so like our rooms, when you had, like, I remember in Kandahar, we did stay in these bigger rooms where they had like 4 or 5 people staying in there, but it was perpetually dark. The lights never came on. We joke about like stalactites and stuff would be growing in there because it was just like humid and gross. And, no one ever went in there to clean because everyone's always on some sort of sleep cycle. So I'm assuming you guys kind of had somewhat of the same issues.
A little bit. We had, usually in combat ops, we had 3 launches a day. The first one was a day launch, day recovery. The second one was day launch, night recovery, and the third one was night and night. And that would put it at about it was about maybe an 18-hour day, depending on how the night recoveries went. But what really And the reason for that, Casmo, is general maintenance on the ship. You can't just keep firing the cats and the resting gear all night. So they would take that time to do repairs of the ship and kind of get it, the boat crew would, if you will. And that was a struggle because, if you were several times I was the last jet to come aboard the carrier, and it was like 2, 3 in the morning. By the time I got to bed, it was 3:30, 4, or even 4 o'clock, and they start test firing the cats at 5 in the morning, and there's no place. It's a steam powered catapult, and the ship's 1,000 feet long. You cannot get away from it. So, fatigue does set in complacency as well. Because you're in your own little. It's like a hamster tube. Your whole life's in this little a couple corridors, but. There was a little bit of break at night, mainly so the ship guys could get the ship, good to go for the next day of combat ops. But it was, I can't remember. I think we would 7 days a week, maybe. I mean, sometimes we would take a day off, but it really wasn't a day off. We just didn't fly.
Right.
But yeah, the tempo is pretty amazing.
So the Air Force side.
It's going to be good.
So I think it depends, right? It's the standard fighter pilot answer, standard aviation answer. If you go talk to T-Bear, which Gonky and I are friends with, A-10 guy, he stood up Bagram. And Bagram in the early days of that war was, they were living in tents. They were building stuff. It was the Wild West, a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
If you compare that to Balad in 2009, where, because typically we take over bases. We either fly out of other countries or we take over bases. And either way, we try to make them as nice as possible. And Balad is a joint base. So the Army was there too. Now, granted, we weren't the same, commingled, but, typically, Guard Reserve is different than active duty. As far as lengths go, Guard Reserve likes to spread the wealth, if you will. So they'll take 120-day deployment and break it up into thirds. Or something manageable for the reserve life. Rainbow is what they call it, where they'll take 2 squadrons and they'll go first third, middle third, final third, and then some guys will do 60 days or whatever, or even the full time. But as far as the daily life goes, I mean, when we first showed up, we were living in tents. They put you in the temporary area, they put you in the tents, and Iraq in January is very, very cold. And, you show up and you're living and sleeping in cots and stuff. And you're like, God, this sucks. And then they're like, okay, the other guys have moved out. Now you're moving into your Connex containers. And they're no kidding Connex containers that have 2 bunk beds, 2 sets of bunk beds. And typically your roommate, so, it's 2 officers per, and your roommate's on a different schedule than you are. So really you're by yourself. And, one of the things, I think on the last episode, somebody talked about Gatorade bottles. That is a thing. You're not supposed to do it. Nobody talks about it. But to go pee in the middle of the night, you have to get up, put your shower shoes on or whatever, and then go find the Cadillac. And usually there's some indigenous personnel, Steve, that is hanging out in there and eyeing you the whole time you're doing this. And this is where, you take a shower, you do all your bathroom activities and stuff. And that's all one side. And where I say, make fun of the Air Force, I mean, we had a Burger King. Now, granted, it wasn't a real Burger King. It had like 2 items on the menu. There was a Subway and there was a coffee bean, the green bean, where the dudes would get their coffee. Yeah, internet cafe. So all that stuff was on one side, and then we would take trucks, little pickup trucks, and drive them over to actually where the deployed facilities where the jets were. And, you talk about what wakes you up. Yeah, you got jets going all the time. That part sucks because it's 24-hour operations. But for us, mortar attacks. I mean, dude, they would love to lob mortars over the fence at us. And, you'd either have it like the closest one I had was like, 50 yards from where I was. And I'm like, dude, I'm just going to die. I'm too tired. I don't care if this is it, whatever. I'm not getting on the ground anymore. I'm done. And, you'd be at the gym, right? Which, by the way, they have a really nice gym with treadmills and machines. And, it's not a prison gym. So you have all the amenities. Now, back in 2009, it's probably changed you had an internet cafe that had phones and internet, and that was the only way you could reach back home because we didn't have Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
From what I understand, as they got farther into this, they got satellite internet, and people could have internet, or pay for it or whatever, wherever they were.
My last deployment, I had AT&T, I think, in Iraq, and I was texting home. I mean,
yeah. I mean, things change a lot with technology, so a little different in 09 versus later, but as far as the daily life, you're always flying. I mean, you're either flying or doing squadron duties like Gonky talked about. If you're not flying, typically dudes would hang out there. We had a little movie room. We'd watch movies, especially sitting alert. When you're sitting alert, you got your G suit on, you're just hanging out, and you're watching. I think we watched Hellboy 1,000 times. We watched the whole season of various shows because Team America was like one of the favorites we watched so many times, which was huge irony. But you're either doing that. There's no real mission planning because it's all done for you. Because all we were doing was close air support and theater airborne reconnaissance. So really, you show up. Here's your mission pack. They give you this thing because the mission planning cell does it. Now you could be assigned to the mission planning cell the day prior and be doing it, but typically somebody was doing that for you, and you'd brief, and you go fly. I remember because my first flights out of non-graded were combat sorties. And what really hit me, I remember the guy's call sign was Opie, great American. My first combat sortie, he briefs like he's going through contingencies and stuff. And a lot of times you just pay lip service. But what hit me the most was, dude, if I jump out, whoever was going to eject, he was like, we're going to set up a perimeter. Anybody that comes around you, strafe them until you're out of bullets, till you bingo out, till you can hand it off to the next guy. And that's where it like snapped that like, hey, because you're getting intel briefs of all the bad mamma jammas that are in the country that want to, because this was back with the, what was it? Was it Bergdahl? Who was the Zarqawi that slit the guy's throat?
Yeah.
That was we're like that's fresh in everybody's mind because if you got caught, so I'm giving myself back problems because I've got my M9 and like 8 magazines because I'm like, nope, I'm not.
Oh yeah.
Meanwhile, you're in an F-16 and you're just like, my back hurts. This sucks. Why am I carrying so much weight? But so you would go fly these missions and they could be like we talked about before, 4 to 6 hours. And then you would go back and, hey, I'm going to hit the gym and then I've got to go to bed because I'm trying to get my body clock aligned with, this country versus back home. And you're trying to call home and they're not awake. And, it's this big thing. But in general, I mean, at the time I was like, man, this kind of sucks. But looking back, I'm like, I'd do that again. It's one of those things where you look back and you're like, yeah, I mean, war sucks, but the camaraderie and the flying with a purpose and having a mission and being around, like-minded individuals that are all highly intelligent and all aiming towards the same goal. You're like, you know what? That was the peak. And I did that
you got
early in
like
my career.
comfortable. You got comfortable with the routine, and so there's something to be said for that. Like you didn't have to worry about what to wear. You didn't have to worry about what to eat. Like you just all that stuff was planned out for you. You just showed up and did the stuff that you joined the military to do. Because we were flying every day. You're flying your just butt off. But yeah, it sounds incredibly similar to our experiences. Just show up. We would show up for we called QRF, and run the aircraft up, probably make sure everything's working, and then either go take off and go fly and just do what we called flying QRF. And that was just fly around. Like no one tell us where to go. It was like, we know the neighborhood. That's awesome. It's like a beat cop, we're just driving around waiting for trouble. Or if we knew something was going on later, we'd go inside, watch TV and wait for the call. And sometimes you'd get called and you'd run out. The aircraft, you've already gone through a lot of this check. So you just jump in, get it cranked up and go. But your brief, that's incredibly familiar. Yeah, we had the same brief a lot of times was, hey, if we go down, nobody's getting within 100 meters or whatever of you. And and of course we had the benefit of, it happened too, where guys would get shot down and the other guy would land and the dudes would jump on the skids or jump on the wheels or, whatever the aircraft was and haul them out of there. Obviously, it's a little bit easier for us, but
dude, very similar. So you mentioned that, but when we employed ordnance, there was an O6 that would come look over our shoulder and look at our tapes. Like it was that high level.
Oh, yeah.
By the time we were, because it had just been, we just had the regime change in the United States and the ROE had just changed. And so anytime you went kinetic, it was O6 over your shoulder. It was getting briefed. You know, it was sometimes they were just bombing dirt. You know, it really wasn't a whole lot to it. But you talk about the QRF and running up the jets. Dude, I got lost at Balad. Like straight up, because when we first get there, there's another squadron there. They're sitting alert. You know, it's a transition. And when it was time for us to do it, they're like, okay, the lieutenant and, you know, whatever, you guys are going to reposition the jets. It is the middle of the night. And Balad, they don't turn the lights on. There's no taxi lights, nothing.
Right.
You know, you're trying to NVG.
That's how you find Balad. You look for the dark patch in the, in the ground.
I am terrible on the ground. I do not do well with ground navigation. And I passed up the sharp left turn to go to the shelter where we were, you know, pre-positioning the aircraft for the alert hangar. And they had to come send the truck out to come get me because I was taxiing down. I was gone. And they're like, where are you going? I was like, I don't know. Help. I'm so lost. And yeah, it was something that you remember and you look back and you're like, yeah, you know, that was good flying. Casmo, you talk about QRF airborne. So we would come back because we're doing a lot of reconnaissance. We're doing a lot of sorties where we just don't do anything and we're just supporting, you know, high speed, low drag guys, but we don't drop anything. And we would come back and the base would be getting mortared. And then we would come back and become the QRF for the base. So, you know, you're coming back and they're like, hey, you know, whatever, you got to hold the high pattern, save your gas. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, can you put your pod here? Because the QRF's going outside the wire. And can you support them for doing it? It was just a pickup game. You know, maybe they didn't even have a JTAC, you know, usually they did. They had somebody that could qualify to do it. But it's just, you know, you see the other side of things. And one of the things while we were deploying that was also different was you practice CAS in a very structured way. And then you get there and it's very different. You've got British JTACs, you've got SEALs that are in convoys. You know, you're supporting guys and they won't tell you what they're doing and you're not supposed to know. You're just like, hey, all the F-16 is supposed to do is if you see somebody plant an IED down the road, stop the convoy and we'll deal with it. Or you see them kicking in the door, you see somebody, you know, out running away, let us know. But otherwise, you know, they're doing this high speed stuff and we're just kind of like, yeah, we're watching it on the FLIR and there's, you know, not much interaction with the actual people kicking in doors.
Yeah, I did a lot of that.
Glunky, you missed out. You missed out with the mortar strikes, man.
Yeah.
Night traps made up for it, Casmo. We're good.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Coming in at night, I got it.
Night traps made up for it.
Well, so I will say, too, I think we talked about this before. I haven't said this story yet about getting shot. People thought, because, you know, Casmo obviously has told his story of getting shot. I landed one time. And the crew chief, like, as soon as I said, sir, oh my God, sir, you've been shot. And I'm like, oh crap. Wow. Okay. Awesome. You know, I'm a lieutenant. This is awesome because we had specific patterns, you know, to avoid getting shot because obviously that's a threat. And people like to, you know, small arms pop off rounds at F-16s flying by. And he's like, sir, look, hydraulic fluid, you know, because jets leak hydraulic fluid sometimes. And there was hydraulic fluid and there was a hole. So it all kind of made sense. Well, the expediter, you know, crusty senior master sergeant walks up to it. And, you know, this crew chief's all excited. You know, he's like, sir, look at that. Look, you got shot. It's awesome. It's not awesome because we got to work on this, but it's awesome. You know, it's combat. He sticks his finger in the hole, so to speak. And he, you know, he's got the hydraulic fluid on. He's like, yeah, that's a threaded hole. He's like, that's a mount that's been there the entire time you've had this jet. We could mount something to it, but it's not a bullet hole, so you're fine. I'm like, son of a bitch, I didn't get shot.
Awesome.
Damn it. Yeah. So anyway, then I found $5.